and welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media. Today, we're joined by Niel Pandya, the CTO with Micro Focus. We last had Niel on looking at the software supply chains. Today, we're looking at DevSecOps, smoothing the journey. We have a very special guest as well, based in Newcastle. He's the CEO and founder with Galah Cyber, Cornford. And we'll be looking at some of Cole's clients and his client profiles and how he is assisting them with AppSec. So DevSecOps, smoothing the journey. Without further ado. Welcome, gents. Welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. Niel Pandya, the CTO with Micro Focus, and Cole Cornford, CEO and founder with Galah Cyber. You're up in Newcastle, Cole, yeah? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Happy to be here. It's a beautiful day in Newcastle, nice and sunny for once. It's been raining quite a lot.
Well, that's New South Wales. In fact, the east coast of Australia. Niel, and welcome back to you also. We last had you on not too long ago, but we were looking at the cybersecurity supply chains as well. And that pretty much covers off on the topic today, DevSecOps, smoothing the journey. The other one we dived into was your role as CTO. So maybe just a brief introduction to what you do as a CTO with Micro Focus. And that'll lead us into Fortify as well.
Sure, Chris. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me back again. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, it's been an interesting few months. You know, cybersecurity is never dull. And we're seeing a lot of excitement just across APJ on that. So the CTO role really is to try and help customers and also us understand how technology is being used, and also encourage the right adoption of technology. We're seeing a lot of traction around AppSec, and it's great to have Cole on the call. Nice to meet you again, Cole. You know, and especially seeing how startups are looking at DevSecOps and how that journey begins. So it's been a very exciting few months since we last spoke. A lot of things happening in the cyber world. The role of CISOs is changing as well, and we're seeing the role of CISOs becoming leaders for digital business, and that's all, you know, down to DevSecOps again, because it's new channels, new ways of delivering services to end customers. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, well, last time we spoke about the life cycle and the supply chains, and that does bring us into the DevSecOps life cycle. And Cole, that's why we've kind of sort of reaching out to you. You deal with some startups and that journey, and most of them in that sort of dev stage, and it's squeezing in the security aspect at the right time before they become operational. Maybe introduce us to Galah Cyber and where you've come from, I suppose, as well, in terms of setting up your own business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I noticed that there wasn't really terribly many people servicing application security in the Australian market. So I figured I'd create a consultancy, but I wanted it to do very differently and not focus too much on just traditional reselling and focusing on how do we just utilize tools in different environments. I wanted to change the conversation to something that's a lot more US centric, which is how do we make sure that customers are able to choose contextualized secure defaults that are cost effective early on. And we've had great success with a lot of different sized organizations, whether it's big enterprises looking at large DevSecOps transformations, as well as small startups and scale ups just beginning their journey. So, and I started out just kind of reaching out to folk in Newcastle. So I got a lot of smaller businesses out this way who've been happy to work with me on trying to improve their security posture. But we've been also growing and finding a lot of other clients around Australia as well. So
the ones that reach out to you, do you find when do you find they give you a call? Where do they tend to get to before they realize, oh, hang on, we're going to need an AppSec specialist here?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ballparks. So it depends on the product that the company has been building as to how early on they want to engage us. But very recently, there's been a lot of customers. Can't imagine why that is. It's not like there's anything in the news that would prompt them to do so. But yeah, I find when customers have achieved product market fit and are looking to scale up their business, that's when security jumps on the roadmap, because they're not able to immediately just focus exclusively on do we have a viable business model, instead of changes to, okay, we've demonstrated that it actually works and we're making money from it. How do we do it in a way that's not going to destroy everything that we've built? So we're mostly dealing with companies that are already established but are looking to grow, especially internationally. So.
Yep. How exposed do you think they are in terms if they don't handle security? How exposed do you think they are? Obviously, it does help with some of the recent breaches and some of the names that have been out there. It's really been sort of top of mind. But yet, do they understand their exposure, or how do you find their exposure is when you sort of have a look underneath the bonnet?
Yeah, so as I'll say that the corporate security practices are usually not particularly good to begin with, but that's just because, usually they're very cash strapped at the very beginning and they just need to just get stuff done, right? So getting engineers to use multi-factor authentication or getting people to actually sign commits when pushing stuff to prod and having, change control processes, that it's immature, and that's fine because what they're trying to do is just make sure that they can build something and make money to feed their families off initially.
Yeah.
Right? So it's when they get to me, I usually have a long conversation with them where I actually sit down and try to work out broadly, how do we approach security for your business? So it's not just application and cloud security. In fact, most of the companies are somewhat mature in this engineering space because they've chosen frameworks or technology options or made decisions early on that have enabled them to be secure as they grow. But it's more about, we don't actually have in-house securities expertise, so we need to bring someone on to understand what the risk to my business is.
And Niel, this really goes back to, I was just thinking our last interview with the supply chains and the supply chain cycle, and there's vulnerabilities in each stage of that. And we'll have a call to action at the end on terms of the DevSecOps life cycle that I've got in front of me here as well. Your observations along the journey for enterprise as well as the startups, where do you find they often get unstuck, or you can help them the most? Maybe the best question is, what's their pain point along the way?
I think Cole touched on a number of those points with great interest, really. Budget is always a challenge, right? And I think for startups, it's a real big challenge because trying to get that, you're trying to make headways into the market and you're trying to manage your investment and so on. It's a big struggle. So I think that budget is still a big challenge. Skill shortage is still an area of concern for a lot of organizations. They just have the skills. And I think the role that Cole and his team play in here, where I like what you said, Cole, having a consulting approach to it and really trying to understand the more holistic nature of the enterprise and what they're looking at in terms of startup. I think that's really important. Just to get them started on that route. But Chris, it's what's interesting is whether you're enterprise or whether you're a startup, it's still very, very similar challenges. Cole mentioned not just AppSec, but also things like multi-factor authentication. Having similar processes in there, and we've seen quite a lot of that, and adoption of frameworks, things like OWASP, for example. So frameworks are useful. A maturity model is very helpful just to try and get organizations started, but also then to build up that culture. So, we've seen it very applicable in larger organizations where you've got different key stakeholders and you're trying to build that culture within large organizations to say, well, okay, who are your key stakeholders? What do you want to build out? What are the processes that you want to fix here? And tie it back to frameworks. I think it'd be interesting to understand from Cole, how does that work with startups? Because, you've probably got a team of maybe 10, pretty busy, pretty burdened with delivering new services. And how do you start to build up that culture?
Yeah, so you need top-down buy-in. The leadership of the company needs to just recognize that security is a big problem and that everyone needs to get on board and start managing it. What I've noticed is that you need to also do things that engage engineers, and coming in with a compliance approach of his like OWASP SAM or ASVS or God forbid 27001, you'll scare them all off, right? So we don't take that approach. What we do is we sit down and build relationships and understand the technology decisions, like why are they using AWS or Ruby on Rails or Laravel or whatever, and actually really empathize and understand like what they're going through as engineers. And then we approach it with a mix early on, usually of developer education. So contextualizing it to the technology that they use, because there's a lot of content out there that's very useful. Just it's not relevant to a lot of people. If you're a TypeScript engineer and you're taught secure coding practices in PHP, well, it's probably not the most helpful, right? So we want to do that. And another one is also getting that security kind of mindset. So a lot of engineers are really good at thinking about how do we just like solve a problem and build a solution, but they're not really good at thinking about how do we abuse this solution. So going through threat modeling discussions does bring up a lot of really interesting points, and they really start to rethink how they're approaching security. So
do you find it's the relationship as well, because you're kind of second guessing their designs, aren't you? Would you say wanting to know what the vulnerabilities are, where they may have gone wrong, and obviously that's potentially hard for anyone to take that, what they might view as criticism, but really it's constructive criticism. Do you find that's where the relationship comes into play? So you're not showing distrust in what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to go particularly far if none of the developers like you as a person. So,
yeah, right.
And it's not just developers, it's a senior leadership as well. You have to manage it at both ends of the spectrum. So one group likes video games and the other one wants to see their company succeed, right? So there's kind of a balance between the two, and you got to be friends with them. And if you can't establish that relationship early on and you can't demonstrate that you have technical credence, then they're just not going to listen to you, and then you're an ineffective consultant. So
yeah, how much planning do you find that you can forward plan with some of these projects? Do you find they're planning enough ahead? And heading back to Niel's sort of interview again last time with the supply chain and the life cycle, it's pretty, in terms of the life cycle and the software development life cycle, it should be well known. It should be sort of laid out. But is it like that in reality?
So it depends on the maturity of the company and what kind of background they're coming from. So the startups and scale-ups in some sectors are very much around a very long-term planning, and other ones just only plan like a month or so in advance based on changing market conditions, right? So they're opportunistic and agile and ready to just shift gears if they need to and pivot. Whereas other people have very long processes because they're working in a place that's highly regulated and they can't, just change gears without causing problems. Yeah.
And Niel, I imagine that's where Fortified comes in, right? You're able to provide a bit of agility there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we go to that, Chris, a question for Cole. How have you seen the appetite from developers to try and take on additional responsibility in terms of security? What's your experience been like?
Yeah, so it's very mixed. I think that you can find champions who are extremely keen on security and want to learn a lot and then advocate for using the tools, choosing secure defaults. And then there's people who just really want to get stuff done. I think most engineers have like a particular area within engineering that they're extremely passionate about. And sometimes it's about DevOps, about just facilitating speed to just get stuff done. Sometimes it's about code quality, documentation, rarely maintenance, and security is just one of those itties is the way I describe it, right? So you got to find that person and get them to advocate for you and for your services, because everyone else is going to be going for SRE or for usability or for whatever's their particular niche. So, but I think based on what I've seen over the last few years, it's definitely increasing in importance as more startups become software as a service providers rather than just like, here's a desktop application and go run it in. That's a security team's job instead of theirs.
Yeah. And Chris, to your point, the question that you asked, Cole touched on a few things, right? Was one to when you talked about tooling, trying to help organizations, startups in particular, understand the right tools for where they are, in terms of the software that they use, whether they're running on cloud or on-prem. So Fortified fits in pretty well in this area, irrespective of whether you're a large enterprise or you're a startup. We do have a cloud offering, a pure SaaS offering. We also have a lot of content in the platform itself, which helps developers understand why we recognize this as a vulnerability. We also have quite a bit of automation built in as well. So it just makes it easy for developers. The key thing that we found a couple of years ago, Chris, was integration was a big part of how technology gets adopted. And the whole idea here is we do want developers to adopt technology, become a lot more security minded very, very early on. If the tools don't integrate, there's a lot of work needed to have basic integration. That's a huge challenge, So as Cole was mentioning earlier, we don't want to make it difficult. We want to make it very accessible. So integration is quite key, having content and context. so you can understand where the vulnerabilities come from, having automation. I think these are quite key, and also having flexibility on ways of using the tools and deployment.
And Cole, any sort of case study that you can refer? Because it's one of those things, it's every business is different, but we're talking about smoothing the journey. What's a good case study that might come to mind?
So we're working with a local healthcare provider, and when we were initially engaged, it was basically to start just doing some code reviews because they weren't very sure about the quality of the software that developers were writing. Out of that code review came us me speaking with their engineering managers to work out kind of a roadmap for things that they need to work on, because a lot of the security kind of problems we were finding needed us to think about security like holistically for the whole business, rather than coming back and saying, at this line of code, you have cross-site scripting, or
Yeah,
at this
right.
you have this. And what we found is that we've moved into doing consistent lunch and learns to try to help developers get a lot more understanding about the types of problems they're introducing and what kind of ways they can reduce the introduction of security like defects into production. We've helped a lot with their cloud architecture. So that's taken quite a while for us to go through and talk about restructuring it, moving everything into Terraform so we have repeatable builds, getting DevOps in, like DevOps processes for deployment, segregation of environments, lots of different fun little security activities. And to me, it just kind of makes sense, because you don't necessarily know better until you have someone come down, sit down to you and explain why it's a problem. And I guess our next stage in the future is to look at enabling the developers to self-serve and not have someone like myself come in and teach them about stuff, or have them be guided and handheld, because it gets to a point where we've dealt with most of the low-hanging fruit, and then they should be looking at ways they can improve their velocity for delivering into production as a scale-up business, right? And the only way for that to work is not to have a manual assessor come in and have a look and talk to them about their architecture or their code findings. It's to start using automated tools. And so we're going to be looking at static analysis and dynamic scanning in the future.
So it's a bit like a holistic approach, but I think it does come back to the topic of the journey. It's not just, as you say, code sort of line by line, and even down to sort of lunch and learns. That sounds fascinating. Do you find you have to do that with every client? How repeatable is it from the consultancy side to go, I'm seeing the same thing no matter which client I go to, and hence you can almost automate what you do as well?
Well, you can automate, but also you need to contextualize at the same time, right? Yeah. So every business has its own challenges and things that matter a lot more. This is why we go in and try to understand how the business functions and like what their key risk factors are and what the board really cares about before we actually do any consulting, really. But our usual process is to go down, sit with the engineers, sit with the tech leads, sit with the cloud people, the SREs, the managers, and just chat through all of our technology, and then use that to inform an application security roadmap. And some places are a lot more mature than other institutions. And that's all good. It is a journey. It's not something that you can just sit down and throw a couple of tools in and then suddenly you're secure. I think we know as long-term security professionals. But I think the biggest thing about the roadmap is that we do see consistent themes. So we are able to go in with experience in implementing these programs in other companies of similar sectors, as well as similar scales, and choosing things that are appropriate for that business. And I guess we try to shy away from using automation really early on. And the only reason for that is because a lot of these developers have not had security training. And because of that, they're just going to, as soon as they use the automation, have a lot of security bugs come up and overwhelm them and scare them. So we want to kind of help them fix and get to a baseline that they're very happy with before we start using the automation because we don't want to scare our engineers off before they get introduced into security, right?
Niel, it sounds like Cole has a almost CTO, CISO hat on when he comes into his client roles. Do you find you can relate to how he's speaking here?
Yeah, we talked about journey, right? And Cole was talking about having a roadmap for application security. And the question I'd like to ask Cole is, what kind of success factors do you look for to show that the journey is of value to an organization? So, anything that you can advise the audience today on that?
Yeah, so I like the using an assurance process, whether it's like an audit or a penetration test, or like just metrics from a number of vulnerabilities identified with tools, and being able to show that like the investment in an application security program is like significantly reducing the amount of issues that are being found, but also improving the time it takes to actually fix these problems. It's quite intangible to go through and say, hey, developer education will result in less vulnerabilities. You can't really tie the two together very well, but you can with static analysis tools, for example.
Yeah.
Niel, Micro Focus, how does Micro Focus come in on some of these, particularly with the tool sets? You sort of covered on some of them, but any stand out in regards to this?
Yeah, we talked on a few of the other areas, like MFA, for example, cloud security. I think that's where Micro Focus plays a big role. We do have a lot of security capabilities within the platform itself, within CyberRes. So CyberRes is a line of business in the Micro Focus, and we have right from identity to using Cole talked about having the right environment. Test data management, for example, is a big area that, especially with some of the breaches we've heard about. Test data management is a big area where we can provide you with data that's fit for development, that's fit for testing, and it's completely anonymized. And we've got things like network security with our SIM, and also some of the other security features with application security testing as well. So I think there's a lot we can do here, and one of the things that is actually really exciting to kind of complements the work that Cole is doing. And Cole, just want to congratulate you and thank you for the good work that you're doing. I think it's the vision that you have of trying to be in a position where we've dealt with the low-hanging fruit now, but startups are automatically thinking about security very, very early on. I think it's a real big step. Raising education awareness. It takes a lot of effort. Lunch and learn sessions. But I think they're a real necessity. So I think that one of the things that we do at Micro Focus, Chris, is we do have things like user groups. One of the things that we've worked on globally is trying to create communities of practice, if you like, encourage best practices, encourage learning. User groups are very, very useful just because you get connected with your peers in the industry and you learn about different trends, for example. So it's something that we do run quite often in Australia. 45 user groups would be really good for some of Cole's customers to come and attend, purely from a networking and learning perspective. Understand how other organizations are approaching application security testing, for example, some of the challenges that maybe having, some of the innovation that they're taking on. So a great way to really connect with the community there.
Yeah, Cole, that was one question. It's not static for you either. You got to keep current. There's always new threats coming through. How do you keep current, and maybe how do you work with Micro Focus, and sort of as Niel just pointed out in terms of the resources that they have?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of like upskilling and learning. I guess the good news for me is that a lot of the issues that we keep finding for most businesses happen to be the same kind of things that we've been finding for a very long period of time.
Right.
So even though specific framework like Laravel may handle authentication differently to Spring or to Rails, which is extremely opinionated about it, at the end of the day, it's still an authentication authorization flaw, right?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest upskilling challenge for AppSec professionals nowadays is that the scope of our responsibilities has changed from being able to use a lot of different tools and to teach engineers about problems and to help them fix a couple of different bugs. But now we've also included like cloud environments and like Docker and containers and Kubernetes, and it's increasing in scope because every company nowadays is a software company, whether they like to believe it or not. And that means that application security is only growing in importance. So I think the hardest challenge for us actually is more about keeping up to date with what's happening over there, more so than what's happening in the code.
Very much. And it's the different environments as well. You mentioned new cloud environments, but the different cloud, public and private, and the hybrid models as well. It creates, And again, I come back to the supply chain that we've discussed. It creates more vulnerabilities. It's just that complexity drives vulnerability. What's your final sort of call to action, Niel, from your point? What can potential customers and even AppSec developers look out for into the future?
I think a point that you just mentioned there about just cloud platforms, we're also looking at a mandate for a lot of organizations, which is to have a multi-cloud presence, right? So that also, if you like, adds a little bit more complexity into things. The thing that I would encourage is definitely encourage participation in user groups. Any sessions that we're running around AppSec, we do quite a bit of work around OWASP as well, and that's just trying to help enterprises and startups and customers just understand AppSec maturity, things like roadmaps and so on. So great way to learn about the direction and what we're doing. Open source is another area that we've invested very heavily in. We acquired a company called Debricked a few months ago, and that offers open source capabilities as well. So important to understand direction of the technology vendors that play a big part in AppSec, because you want to be relevant and you want to make sure how their tools fit into your organization and with your processes as well. We also have some really good content, and I think we've shared a link with you on that, Chris. Really good content to look at to understand how you can leverage AppSec programs, look at things like OWASP, leverage the help of organizations like Coles, and how you can partner with them, leverage their services, and really look at building those communities for AppSec.
Wonderful. Look, I'm looking at the DevSecOps life cycle here. We'll have the link in the show notes as well. But look, Cole Cornford, the CEO and founder of Galah Cyber in Newcastle, you're on the front line. That's a photo of you at B-Sides Melbourne, I think. So keep your leadership going, and thank you very much for coming on today. And Niel Pandya, the CTO with Micro Focus, once again, DevSecOps, smoothing the journey. Gents, thank you very much for coming on My Security TV.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Cole.
Thank you.
Have a great day.